the Jennifer Ward-Oppenheimer Research Grant. It seeks to support African researchers who are focused on research that contributes to the advancement of the environment and the allied sciences. This is to address the challenges that affect the continent of Africa. Well, businessman and conservationist Jonathan Oppenheimer talks to us now from the United Kingdom this morning. Mr. Oppenheimer, thank you very much for your time. Let's talk about the JWO Research Grant. We've already explained in that introduction what it is aimed at. What do you believe are the most pressing challenges affecting the African environment and its sustainability right now?
Well, Xoli, actually, from an African perspective, there are so many different challenges. There are challenges around our people and giving them opportunities to have lives that are fulfilled and meaningful. There is a desperate need for us to attract significant amount of capital to South Africa, to the African continent, to create a space for growth. There is an enormous challenge to reinforce and rebuild the fabric of society, which is being challenged across the continent.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there is also the really catastrophic challenge of global climate change, the effects of climate warming, and we need to find ways to do both of those things. In the JWO Award, the Jennifer Ward-Oppenheimer Award, we're focusing predominantly on the climate change and environmental challenges that we face.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
All right. Sorry to interrupt you there. I wanted to find out then the qualifying criteria for interested applicants, because this seems targeted at young scientists who are eager to explore this field. Well,
maybe just by way of a context to the kind of extraordinary people that we've been able to attract and the more than 1,000 applications we've had in the 5 years that this journey has been unfolding, which is amazing, all mainly doctorates and postdoctorates. The challenge is to look at issues that can materially move the dial in terms of the sustainability of our environment. And we've opened applications worldwide. We have naturally a bias towards leading scientists coming out of the African continent. And we've been incredibly blessed to have applications from sort of more than 30 African countries across the board, and literally have the pick of people who can make a real difference to humankind's lives, particularly in Africa, but worldwide.
Let's then talk about at least the environment I'm most familiar with, which is South Africa. We have energy problems that also impact on the environment. You have infrastructure decay, and you have fresh water systems that are simply not being managed properly. Out of that list, what for you is critical for policymakers to come up with solutions immediately?
All of them. And when I was young, the idea of being able to deal with these in a sequential, progressive way, deal with one problem, move on to the next, was very much sort of normal practice. But we've waited so long now that we have to deal with these things in parallel. And dealing with them in parallel is challenging. And from a policy perspective, we need to deal with the energy crisis. We need to absolutely focus on and deal with the water crisis we have. We need to be acutely aware of the harm we're doing to the environment, while in the same breath creating opportunities for people to feed themselves. And a Western perspective that we can all sacrifice to save the environment is not that easy in the African and the South African context, where so many of our people are at really challenging points in their lives where often they can't even find the calories necessary to feed themselves in a day. And we need to solve these multiple questions at the same time. So I often talk about the need to navigate this complex simultaneous equation. We can't afford to lose anything. We actually have to win in all fronts. And right now, the report card doesn't suggest we're winning.
Yeah. Let me sway the conversation a little bit. You form part of an elite group of business people, successful ones. At that, you are extremely wealthy. There have been calls, not just in South Africa, by the way, but I think including the United States, where the tax or the rich people, the understanding, or at least the call, is that they must be taxed a little bit more in order to benefit the rest of us. Do you believe in that call?
I have a slightly different approach and a different perspective, and that is what we need and how we get it we can debate in a much more engaged way. What we need is additional goods and services so that the people in the environments we operate, so for this conversation, for this purpose, South Africa and the greater African continent, have additional goods and services to share between them or to be able to purchase. And to do that, you need to be able to build businesses or build activities that create those goods and services. Without those goods and services, people are just going to struggle and fight and basically be very uncomfortable. So when you look at what's happening in the world, we need to find ways to increase the supply of the two factors that make goods and services. Those two factors are money to build stuff and the people to run the stuff that is built or to provide the services. In South Africa, we got lots of people. Unemployment, depending on whose statistics you want to take, is from 30% to 60% youth unemployment. It's off the charts bad. We need to find job opportunities. And the only way you're going to have job opportunities is by attracting capital and investing capital to build stuff to provide those jobs. And if you look at the world today, the amount of money that's actually flowing to build stuff is shrinking, not growing relative to the global supply of money.
Yeah.
And therein lies the problem. And what's interesting and what history shows is that family businesses and families that have wealth are prepared to build stuff. So I would be inclined to encourage the building of stuff, factories, roads, service businesses, spaza shops, you name it.
Yeah.
So that people can be taught to fish, to use the analogy from the Bible, rather than being given a fish.
Let's conclude the conversation. When you talk about job opportunities or the creation of job opportunities, that's dependent on whether or not the economy is going to grow. And here, in the South African environment, it's expected to grow at a meager 0.2%. What do you believe are the obstacles preventing economic growth here in South Africa?
So the single biggest obstacle is the ability to attract capital into building additional goods and services. And ultimately, I'm afraid, capital is not very loyal. It's actually a coward, and it will go as it can around the world to where it can make the most amount of money for the least amount of effort. And in that basis, we look at South Africa and we aren't winning in any measure to attract our fair share of capital. In the mining space or in the extractive industry space, we have a disproportionate blessing in South Africa in terms of the amount of assets that we have that can be used by by South Africa to add to the world economy. And yet our share of capital flowing to those businesses is tiny compared to the percentage of assets we have on the world stage. So instead of money flowing into what should be a continually important part of our industry, it's flowing it elsewhere, and we call it a sunset industry, and we're talking about the death of mining. It doesn't need to be if we really understand that the job here is to get money into the ground. Once you've built a factory, it doesn't go away. If you invest in a financial market and you don't like what's happening, you take your money and you run away to Australia or the US or China or wherever tomorrow. And that is the problem that we have from an economic perspective. From an environmental perspective, and I think that's really important, we also need to be acutely aware that humankind is dependent on the environment we're in. And the environment we're in is declining in terms of its biodiversity dramatically. And as the biodiversity declines, so our resilience, both as an ecosystem and as human beings, decline. So we see increases in diabetes, we see increases in many sort of hypertension, depression, all the sort of mental health and other really problematic challenges.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I was just listening to the BBC yesterday, to quote a competitor, and there was an American, the head of the Center for Disease Control in America was talking about the impact of loneliness being equivalent to smoking every single day in terms of life expectancy and harm to human beings.
Sure. Jonathan, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm pressed for time, and I'd be quite keen to squeeze this question in. In South Africa, there's a raging debate right now about clean sources of energy versus what has been referred to as the coal-fired industry in terms of the power stations we run. Where do you stand on that debate, very briefly?
I am 100% behind a grey to green transition. I'm equally not so foolish as to recommend switching off grey instantly. But we need to desperately encourage and support the green transition. And I'll just give you a very quick anecdote to the problem. In China, it takes approximately 6 months from a point of we're going to do this to connecting a wind farm to the national grid. In South Africa, the average time is 15 years. Therein lies your problem. You can't make a greater green transition when it takes forever to make the transition. We can build as quickly as the Chinese. What we can't do is navigate the regulatory environment as quickly as the Chinese. It's in the gift of government to enable the greater green transition, and it needs to step up and it needs to support it and not cause the preservation and prolonging of the grey industry at the expense of the green industry.
Jonathan Oppenheimer is a businessman and a conservationist. Thank you very much for your time and thoughts. Hope we can have a longer chat when you are in South Africa. Thank you for your time.